He has employed his entire fail family. He has put them in positions of power. Every single one of them is so inept at their jobs that they're unable to do the things that they should truly be able to do. He's loaded it with people like Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is not someone you would be allowed to have near your 5-year-old. You wouldn't let him near your kids, let alone your lawyer. I'm going to try and explain everything. I wanted to try and explain everything. I've been reading this book, The Sickness in the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from the Pandemics or Itself, by Richard Wolff. And Richard Wolff does a really good job of explaining very complex economic theory to a Philistine like myself who wouldn't understand these things. But it seems like he's figured something out, and that is capitalism as a system has a flaw built into it. Every 4 to 7 years, there's either a depression or a recession. And this happens. Sometimes it happens right away. Sometimes we can go, I don't know, an extra 8 or 9 years. Sometimes it's 12 years. But time and time again, the cycle continues. There seems to be a depression or recession. Sometimes when it gets really, really bad in the form of a Great Depression, there has to be government intervention. The government has to come in and do something, because at the end of the day, you need people to be able to buy things. You need people to be able to make the widgets. And if they can't make the widgets, if they're all homeless or if they're all starving, then the system itself collapses. That's one of the flaws built into capitalism.
Good evening, Lance and
now,
chat.
capitalism,
Who else
for all
is
its
ready
grandeur,
to succumb
all
to the
it's cracked
sweet
up to be,
embrace of a
it does
kind
one
and
thing, it does
merciful
one thing
death?
really, really well. It creates vast abundance. It creates vast abundances of wealth. It just doesn't distribute them properly or equitably. It creates surplus. It creates an incredible amount of surplus. We as a human species have figured out how to produce more food than we consume. We actually produce twice as much food as we consume. And yet there are billions of people who don't get enough nutrition every day. So the problem isn't the production under capitalism. Capitalism is really, really good at making us make things, make lots of stuff. The problem is distribution. That's why we have more homes than we do Americans in America. And yet there's something like 6 or 8 homes in America that are empty. Because again, it's the distribution part that we have a very, very big problem with. And this book does a really good job of showing that all it took, because again, in this cycle, this 4 to 7 years, when there's like a depression or recession, even the times where we know the reason for these things, you know, when there's like a giant, let's just say something in 2018, a financial crisis, a crash, if you will, a financial crash in the housing sector because of these poor toxic stocks, these liquid stocks that are suddenly being sold, and it creates this house of cards that collapses. We don't actually do anything to fix the problem. You see, when we have this depression or this recession, we do these little band-aid solutions. But everyone who is responsible for something where we can actually point to them and be like, you are the cause of this, we don't put them in jail. We don't arrest them. After all, we don't really arrest white-collar crime. They're too big to fail. These are the champions of industry that uphold our entire system and keep perpetuating the cycle that we find ourselves in. And again, it related back to the pandemic, because the richest country in the world, the most capitalist nation that ever capitalist, the United States, should have been able to handle this better than any other country anywhere. I mean, that's just what it should have been. It's so rich, and yet with what, 4 to 5% of the world's population, they have 25% of the world's cases, 25% of the world's deaths. What the pandemic did was it kind of shined a light,
Feed them
a
to
light
the
that I think
Richard
a lot of people are
wolves.
starting to see about this thing we call the capitalism. And it's kind of a nebulous term. One of the problems with capitalism, and I know this is a problem on the left, is that we use it as kind of like, it's almost become the QAnon on the left sometimes, right? Like, capitalism has done everything wrong. Capitalism killed my dog. Rawr. And people don't really take you seriously, because capitalism, just by a raw definition, what is capitalism? It's the right to buy and sell or own capital. That's it. It's a system that is decidedly better than feudalism. It was better than feudalism. I mean, it took the bubonic plague to transfer the system of feudalism that we used to have into a new system in which we would coalesce power into a singular mighty lord or king. And they were not ordained by God, like someone else has told you, or like they like to tell you that it's basically a Christ-like ascension and that it was always meant to be. They become ordained because it was necessary, because these small little mini dictatorships of the feudal system that we existently had, that had to change. But of course, that evolved once again. There was a combination of things: disease, revolutions, rebellions around the world. But eventually, feudalism gave way to a whole bunch of different versions of capitalism. We had mercantile capitalism. It was a form of usury. Capitalism, as we know it today, is a very different kind of capitalism. So it might be confusing when people say capitalism is causing all this. So I'm gonna narrow it down. What we find ourselves in today is something called late stage capitalism or post-industrial capitalism. It's capitalism that's mixed in with a whole bunch of things. You can also call it American capitalism, because I'm going to get very, very brief into the history of America and how they benefited and also caused just immeasurable human suffering as a result. But think of it like, what's the name of that really shitty soda? Crystal Pepsi. Yeah, it's Crystal Pepsi capitalism. We have a new capitalism. It's shiny, it's bright, but it'll make you just as sick as the ones that came before it. So yes, there's crystal capitalism, and I just want to touch on that ever so briefly. Because again, if you want to look to what capitalism has done to America as just kind of like, let's say, a microcosm for the rest of the world, you have but to look at the differences between the white population of the United States and the black population of the United States. Because the two have very, very different stories under American capitalism, under the system of capitalism that we find ourselves today. I'm not even going to try and explain the horrors of chattel slavery at the start of the story, because to do so in the small little rant would be disingenuous at best. And two, I don't want to spend the entire time crying, because there's no way to describe that kind of stuff without just being utterly horrified. But let me just say that, yes, for the first couple hundred years of America's birth, we had two very different classes of people. We had slaves and we had slave owners. And part of that was, for hundreds of years, a huge amount of wealth was amassed by the white population of the United States at the hands of the slaves who were picking cotton in the South and were making textiles in the North. That's what it was. That was the entire system we had. And that's just the way it was until, of course, there was a war. A war was fought. Yes, a civil war. And I know there's a lot of different ways. There's people like to say that there's different causes for the war, and there is. There absolutely is. But the choice of the South to want to secede from the United States was to uphold the ability to continue to make money off slavery. You have to remember the birth of America. It's a little bit badass at the end of the day. They defeated the monarchy. Now, they didn't defeat the monarchy for the cause of freedom, like we're being told in the school books. They were defeating the monarchy because taxation is theft, because they didn't want to pay taxes to the king anymore. They wanted to keep the riches that they themselves were accruing. And the same thing was happening with the Civil War. The South wanted to keep the riches that they were accruing through slavery. I mean, it's a great system. All you have to do is dehumanize an entire race of people, which is just so baffling because, as we know now from modern science, race doesn't actually exist. So we're just enslaving other humans. There's just one race, the human race. But we had to dehumanize them, because otherwise, how do you justify doing something like that? How do you justify doing something like that for hundreds of years? Something that is just so barbaric. Like, it's just so fucking beyond the pale that it's just like, it's maddening to even think about. So we have to separate ourselves from that. So of course, we invent these classes of people. We invent the white race at the very top, and then all the other races subsequently below it. And that system has permeated until today. It's still going on. It's still a problem. And it's not like after the war, everything suddenly became peachy keen. I mean, yes, the previously slave class of the United States was promised by Abraham Lincoln that they were going to get something along the lines of reparations. And I'm not talking about reparations like today's reparations, where people like to talk about how is it justified? I mean, you aren't even technically the descendant of slaves. How can you justify getting reparations? Well, if you look to other countries that have done that, what we call mea culpa, such as Germany after the Holocaust, there's just like a striking difference between what America did. America had promised land to the previous slave class of the United States, and then Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. So that never happened. Instead, what we got is segregation. We got two systems, two classes of people in the United States. We got two separate drinking fountains. We got two sets of schools. We got two sets of bars, two sets of buses, two different classes stratified, yes, on an economic level. You see, one of the problems with people who experience white fragility is that there's this book that they've kind of gotten, like, if you want to get rid of white fragility, why don't you get yourself a book that gives you a white guilt pass, and you literally call it White Fragility. It's a wonderful book written by white liberals to appease more white liberals, because once you have this book, it's like, oh yes, I get it's a get out of jail free card for my white guilt. It's wonderful. Yes, Queen. Even though the whole book, which I've read, by the way, is going to obfuscate the history of capitalism and slavery. in the United States. I mean, it's going to talk about slavery as a bad thing. That's pretty easy to do. But it's not going to talk about how the vast amounts of wealth were accrued into a certain class of the United States. And again, once we go past slavery, once we go into the Jim Crow era, another thing's going to happen. How is wealth accrued in the United States? How is wealth accrued anywhere? What's the easiest way for people in the modern democracy to gain wealth? How do you do this? It's by home ownership. So we've got a system now. We've got a system called redlining, a system in which a certain class of people in the United States were only going to be granted certain bank loans for certain areas. We were going to actually stratify them into different communities in the United States. But it gets worse. It gets even worse than that, because those same communities, those poorer communities that you're going to now stratify people into, those same very communities are the same people who will be taxed. Those communities are going to tax you, and those taxes are going to be put into your education, into the school system. And so that is going to perpetuate this endless cycle. But wait, it gets even more fucked up. It gets even more worse than that. Because even though we ended slavery, and we're going to do that by adding an amendment to the Constitution, we're going to add a footnote. Yes, we're going to add a little footnote that slavery is still allowed as long as it's for a criminal. And then we're going to stack the decks against you in every possible way. From the interactions that you have with police, to the amount of times that you're stopped for the same crimes as white people, to the judiciary system. So when you meet a judge, or you're actually allowed to go in front of a court, you're going to have to be seen, and you're going to get higher sentences, more frequent sentences across the board. We're going to do it until we get to the point where 50% of the population of people in jail happen to be black males, when they only make up 6.5% of the population of the United States. We got to that point, and sorry, that's directly for violent crimes, but we got to that point by doing this endless perpetual cycle. And then at first we're going to blame this on a whole bunch of different things. We're going to blame this on genes, on them not having high IQs, all right? We're going to use all kinds of weird pseudoscience and eugenics bullshit to try and justify it. But then when that goes out of vogue, we're going to evolve that into race realism. And we're going to say that it has something to do with their culture, all right? Their culture doesn't promote having a single family, black fathers in households. That's the real reason that all this is happening, okay? That's the reason that all this took place. When, I don't know, maybe having a whole bunch of them in jail, putting a whole bunch of people in jail, and again, in jail doing slavery, doing unpaid labor for the United States, might have something to do with that. These cycles perpetuate themselves so much that we get ourselves to the point now where the accrued mass of wealth, I believe, the median income of a black family in the United States is less than half of that of as a white family. And that's going down. That's going down. It doesn't matter. I know things are improving, but it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican. It doesn't matter if the civil rights movement happened. It doesn't matter if every single one of the Black Panthers fought for civil rights at a certain point. It doesn't matter if Malcolm X died for what he believed. None of that matters if that rate is trending downward. By 2054, it's supposed to reach $0. So that's the course. That's the course that we've charted. So that's capitalism in the United States. But guess what? It gets even worse. It gets worse than that, because it doesn't affect only the black communities. It affects all people. It affects all people. Since neoliberalism, since the advent of Thatcher and Reagan saying that we need unregulated markets, that we need to abolish unions, that these red tape are holding us back, we have seen a stagnation of wages in the United States for everyone, while the cost of living has increased dramatically. The cost of healthcare has exploded. The cost of housing has exploded, making it not available for everyday Americans. So guess what? We have all these rural white Americans who are also experiencing something that Marxists like to call alienation. They're experiencing the same alienation that everyone else is. Now, in the olden days, in olden times, you could explain alienation and you could explain this whole isolation for everybody with a really simple trick. You just have to keep doing what we always do, which is vilify other people. You vilify, here's the thing about corporations. If anyone didn't know this, and corporations play into this entire concept that I'm talking about in, let's say, Crystal Pepsi capitalism, corporations do not care. Corporations do not care about nationalism. There's no such thing as a corporation that has a deep vested interest in America. They are traitors to the country. How do I know this? Look no further than World War II. What happens in World War II? Companies that want to sell their Coke to the Nazis have to change their name. They have to change their name to Fanta. IBM, the computer company that I'm sure made parts that I'm talking to you right now over the internet through, IBM invented the cataloging system that was used in the Holocaust. They invented Holocaust machines. Yes, that same IBM. These American corporations don't care at all about America. They don't fall along those lines, because why would they? Corporations have one thing and one thing only. They have to show an increase of money or profit or value to their shareholders. They have a fiduciary responsibility to do that. Every year, that's what they have to do. So based on that alone, guess what happens? When all of a sudden production becomes expensive in America because of those pesky little things called worker rights, unions, they leave the country. That was the olden days. They would just leave the country and they would set up shop where it was way cheaper to produce and manufacture these goods. And all of a sudden, you've got a huge swath of America going broke. All of a sudden, these auto manufacturers get up and leave. Because again, they don't care about Americans. They care about selling cars to Americans. That's the only thing that's important to them. And then, all of a sudden, when that wasn't working out as well, it wasn't as profitable, they shifted over to robots. Yes, automation started replacing all the jobs. We didn't tax the robots. We didn't tax all these machines that are taking over American workers. And this system keeps on going and going and perpetually going until we get ourselves to the point today where, yes, we have an unbelievable amount of poor white Americans, and even worse for other groups, Indigenous Americans, Black Americans, Latin Americans. Every single one of them is experiencing this stratified in this class system that we've created. And it's getting to the point where we find the pandemic. It's introduced to it all. These rural Americans, these white Americans, they did not vote for Donald Trump simply because they hate women and they're racist. That analysis is so surface level. It is like, it doesn't even scratch the sense that they do not feel represented by their elected officials. And why would they? Again, you're going into these perpetual cycles in which the money is being funneled into the hands of the very few. The rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poorer. So yes, everyone is experiencing the same kind of alienation. But guess what? Their alienation is tapped into people like Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson is really good at telling you that guess what's wrong? You know what's wrong? It's the globalists. It's the international cabal of bankers. It's the liberal media. These are, by the way, all coded dog whistles for the Jews. He really hates the Jews. But anyways, these are all just coded messages for the fact that, hey, I'm going to take all your alienation, I'm going to siphon it and weaponize it into something and galvanize you. And it's going to go to the point where eventually you will start believing in batshit crazy conspiracy theories over the truth. Over the truth of what it is that, there's no secret. Everything I'm revealing right now is not something that, you'll only find if you go deep into the tombs and the annals of the secret scripts of Marx and Engels. Only they can reveal the truth. No, this stuff is just laid bare. It's very easy to find out which are the richest companies in the world, which are the most powerful people in the world, the people who run and control the world. It's available to you right now. You can Google it. You can Wikipedia it. You'll find every single one of them instantaneously. And we get ourselves to the point where this pandemic just exemplifies everything that's wrong with this. Everything that's wrong. Everyone who has different levels of poverty, everyone who cannot afford healthcare, everyone who already has pre-existing conditions, things like obesity, things that disproportionately affect, yes, I'm going to say this again, members of the Black community, members of the Indigenous community, members of the Latin community. Every single one of those groups are suddenly dying at higher rates. The poor are dying at much higher rates. It is showing us in real time what this all means. And then all of a sudden there's this little beacon that comes along. And don't worry, I'm not going to do this circle jerk lefty thing where I just keep talking about, Daddy Sanders as if he was just going to change the world. He was a sock dem. He was a sock dem who was coming along, but his messaging really resonated with people. Really resonated with people. All of a sudden the idea that Medicare for all, that healthcare is a human right, that struck a chord. It struck such a chord that an independent senator from Vermont was able to run 2 near successful presidential campaigns against the biggest corporate institutions of the world, against everything. And they got scared. Holy shit, they get scared. They got so scared the second time that they did a whole little Bloody Tuesday surprise. That's what happened. All of a sudden you could see the stocks for the companies that are, the insurance companies of the United States who profit off human misery. Those companies, their stocks were plummeting because they were scared. And so we got good old Barack Obama, who makes a phone call to Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, 2 names that you would never know off the top of your head, but now we all know them. She would only be infamous for throwing staplers at people as some act of defiance, But instead we get this. We get that, we get the coalescing, and then they effectively destroy the Bernie Sanders run. They never destroyed the ideas. They never destroyed the concepts. And those have been resonating since everyone learned them. They're resonating across the board, by the way. People like Fox News listeners, I don't know if you saw the polls that came out of Fox News yesterday, overwhelmingly supporting ideas that Bernie Sanders himself made popular. Ideas like Medicare for all, ideas like free education, ideas that even housing should be a human right. Those kind of things are resonating now with people, and it's important. But instead, we're stuck with what we're stuck with. We're stuck with this Biden election. It looks like he's about to win, and I think he should, because again, Trump is terrible. But make no mistake, Trump is the end result of all of this. That same alienation that I was talking about. That Trump is the end game. Trump is not like he's so easy to pinpoint as just being deeply disturbing and troubling. I mean, come on, it's a reality TV star that has become the president of the United States. The least controversial thing about him was that he paid a sex worker with campaign funds while his wife was pregnant with his child, and just thinks that's super dope. And everyone else laughed about it. That's the least controversial thing about him. Something that would have tanked an Obama presidency. But anyways, Trump is just the end result of the system that everyone keeps feeling. If we don't correct course, if we don't address the actual systemic things that are causing this, which I've laid out very clearly here, then it's going to keep happening. And it's going to happen to worse and worse individuals. Like, the only thing that has stopped fascism this one time, outside of the fact that the electorate and the American people still are voicing their concern, democracy still lives despite all the erosions it's had, the fact that that still exists, the only thing that has stopped fascism is that Donald Trump is a buffoon. He is a clownish buffoon, and that's it. That's it. He's so bad at his job. He has employed his... The fact that that still exists, the only thing that has stopped fascism is that Donald Trump is a buffoon. He is a clownish buffoon, and that's it. That's it. He's so bad at his job. He has employed his entire fail family. He has put them in positions of power. Every single one of them is so inept at their jobs that they're unable to do the things that they should truly be able to do. He's loaded it with people like Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is not someone you would be allowed to have near your 5-year-old. You wouldn't let him near your kids, let alone your lawyer. Like, you wouldn't make him part of your cabinet. What the fuck, Rudy Giuliani? But sure. Keep on doing it. Get Corey Lewandowski in there. Corey Lewandowski will say anything for $70. I know this because people have told me. But for $70, you can make Corey Lewandowski the senior policy advisor to Donald Trump say the 14 words. I don't know. You should try it. Go on Cameo right now. $70. You might get some funny results. He's surrounded himself by just asinine man-children who are, yes, trying to do their best job to gut and erode every freedom that the United States still holds dear. But they're not succeeding because, again, they're inept, and it looks like democracy may have won. It looks like Biden is going to win the presidency. He's not going to win the Senate, so passing anything is going to be hard. But the moment is calling for it, all right? This is not something like the minute Biden wins, the second that he is crowned, is the second that everyone should be rattling the sabers, is the second that everyone should be going, okay, now, apparently you said you'd listen. You need to listen now, because we need extreme changes, or this will happen again, and it'll happen much worse with someone who is far more competent.
Hey, we want to mutual aid you to get some eyeballs on your work. So if you have a leftist YouTube channel or Twitch stream or something you want us to advertise, just send us a 20 to 30 second ad using the forums at weareserfs.com. We'll do our best to help you out. And please submit once per channel.
To our gods, I'm Rav, and Xander Forbes. We shall build temples in your honor. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we live to do your bidding. To our lords, Jeffrey Lamb, Trevor R., Stephen, Nine Tails Cosmic Fox, Aunt Josephine, Poppy Nelson, Ryan Lubin, Jimothy K. Meeble Beeps Jr. We bow meekly for your pleasure. And to our Knights of the Round Table, Josh Mickelson, Dylan Veit, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Political Puppy, Ali Menthal, Jimmy Big Nuts, Andreas Chitoro, Good Poon Hates Cops, That's Solid Poon Then, Dr. Zayas, Joppy, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Jack Darko, Thomas Barrington, J. Fraser Cartwright, Goofalankius, Melissa Murphy, Nicholas Marks, Alexander Thaler, Ramon Acosta, and Ali Retta Jaffer. We salute you. Love you all. Peace.